Hola, muchas gracias a las personas que estén viendo esto por asistir a nuestra cuarta versión del Festival Internacional de Documentales Aricadoc. Hoy tenemos el agrado de poder tener una conversación con uno de los directores que nosotros admiramos mucho su trabajo. Tiene una filmografía muy especial, un estilo muy particular que nosotros admiramos bastante. Y hoy tenemos también la posibilidad de mostrar su último largometraje, The Annotated Film Guide of Ulysses S. Grant. Estoy hablando del realizador norteamericano Jim Finn. Hola Jim, ¿cómo estás?
Ah, gracias por
Eh,
haberme invitado al festival.
bueno, gracias a ti por asistir también a esta conversación. Y bueno, también estamos con Juan Pablo Donoso, que es el director del festival, que nos estará acompañando también en esta conversación sobre el último film de Jim. Bueno, de hecho, Juan Pablo yo creo que va a empezar.
Bueno, muchas gracias Jim por poder acompañarnos y por la gentileza de aceptar este intercambio de reflexiones con nuestro festival. Bueno, un poco la primera pregunta que queríamos hacerte con respecto a tu película tiene que ver un poco con los orígenes de la misma, porque notamos que hay una diferencia a lo que eran al menos tus largometrajes anteriores. Eh, y queríamos saber cuándo supiste o sentiste que querías hacer esta película. O sea, si eso se vincula a algún momento en específico de tu vida o algún momento de lo que estaba sucediendo. ¿Cómo supiste que querías hacer esta película que cambia un poco su foco desde hablar de otros lugares a hablar un poco del ti mismo y del propio pueblo norteamericano?
Yeah. Gracias otra vez por haberme invitado al festival. Y yo tenía una beca, recibí una beca por otra película que se llama ahora Testamento de Ramón Mercader, ¿cómo se llama? El asesino de Trotsky. Estoy pensando en una película sobre él. Y lo que pasa es que con Trump es imposible pensar con claridad en los Estados Unidos ahora. Y entonces yo hace años he leído una película de Grant y como en mi país, Grant, hasta los últimos, hasta que hace como 5 o 10 años, Grant fue más o menos poco conocido, fue conocido como un famoso borracho que seguramente ¿cómo se llama? Derrotó a la Confederación del Sur durante la Guerra Civil, pero fue en una manera muy como brutal, ¿no? Y porque la idea del let me go back in English, sorry. The idea was that we have, two sides of the Civil War and two white people arguing with each other. Two gentle white people who got into a battle, the two brothers who love each other, and they fought. And the whole idea of slavery and centering the black people was lost. And then in the last 20 years, and especially the last 5 years, with Black Lives Matter, with the new biography of Grant, and a lot of, and now with like getting rid of the Civil War, the Confederacy names on military bases, and all these kinds of things. There's been this big focus, and so I really wanted to go and visit these sites of the Civil War, and think about it from this different perspective, like rather than think of it as a national tragedy of the United States, think of it from a different perspective. Well, what if there was a golpe de Estado? What if there was a coup d'etat within the United States of white supremacists? What if? What if that happened? What if white supremacists took over a third of the country? Wow, what would we do? Well, we know what we would do. We would fucking murder them and kill them and push them back into the dirt. Sorry, it's not all we did, but literally that's what happened. And so a lot of the brutality of the Civil War was this response to this very brutal coup d'etat by the South, by this small group of men who then collaborated and got everyone else in. So, you know, it just seemed like an obvious thing I needed to think about and fantasize about, like go back, because, you know, nowadays we're in a democracy where they haven't like crossed over this line and brought military forces. And so we're like, what can we do? How do we think about this now? And so I really wanted to take this journey and look at it. And then I started looking at this kind of history of the United States and how we remember the Civil War. So that's what brought me to it.
Okay. Gracias. Bueno, y con relación a este quizás giro de lo que estabas planeando hacer en un principio y esta urgencia que sientes de hacer otra película a raíz de lo que estaba ocurriendo precisamente en el país, preguntarte quizás si nos puedes comentar cómo fue el proceso de decidir la forma que iba a tener, cómo lo fuiste descubriendo.
Yeah. Bueno, una cosa es que la otra película que estoy todavía, I'm still figuring it out, right? Fue muy complicado y no podía pensar claramente con esta película. Pero con la cosa de Grant, yo estaba pensando que I mean, it's very clear what he did. He was in Missouri, he was in Kentucky, he was in Mississippi, he was in Tennessee, he went to Virginia. And so I was like, maybe I'll just I'll drive. And I had my 16 millimeter camera. Y usé algo del dinero. I used a little bit of that money from the grant. So I had money left over. And I was like, if I have like, normally I wouldn't want to deal with 16 millimeter if I don't have a grant, because I'm like, it's, it ends up being like a lot of money. It was like, maybe, I don't know how much it was just for the film alone, $1,800 just for the film. And then I have to drive. So that's gasoline. I put like 4,000 miles on my car, and then I have gasoline. And I try to get places to stay. I stayed with my cousin. I stayed with a friend, but it's not that easy, because if you're hitting a schedule, you really need to stay hotels. And so I just knew what I want to do. And I did the map, and I mapped it out, and I made 2 plans where I would kind of do this loop and kind of come around. And I figured out more or less what it would do. But even if you figure out everything, like I went to, in Chattanooga, I went to Lookout Mountain, and I have this beautiful, I woke up at 4 a.m. I went to get my dawn shot, and the clouds are coming up, but I had half a roll, and the other half of the roll was the tomb of Lee. And I had filmed Robert E. Lee's tomb, and his creepy ghost messed up my footage, man. It was the one roll of film that failed. It was one, I shot, I think 38 rolls or 35 rolls. I can't remember how many I shot. Maybe it wasn't that. It's 35, 37, something like that. And one roll totally failed, and it was that one. And so I missed my sunrise shot, but whatever. I got some nice stuff. And then as I was there, I looked around, and I found some of them are big, huge national parks that are very busy, but some of them, like the Confederate Cemetery I went to, was, it's in the middle of nowhere. So it's a very weird, it's not in the middle of nowhere. It's near a highway, but it felt like it was in the middle of nowhere. So I knew that I had this travelogue idea, and then I needed to do the sound, and I wasn't sure about voiceover, what to do. I had different ideas. I had many doubts about my own voiceover. I knew I had an idea of what to do with him, but I was like, what do I do with voiceover? I wasn't sure. That came to me in the editing.
Pero sí tenías claro que era un viaje y que ibas a seguir el paso del general Grant. O sea, eso era la base ya, de seguro.
Seguro de las batallas, y algo que había como muchas batallas hidden, ocultas, o sea, como Milliken's Bend, uno de los primeros de los negros, de los soldados negros en los Estados Unidos. Y entonces, I knew that there would be these small battle sites that I could try and find. One more thing is, in in the 19th century, the role of Black troops was known very well. And Black troops were respected. They were part of the parades. People understood, white people in the North understood what Black people did for the Civil War. But as they died, that history got lost. And then in the 20th century, with segregation, there was just no need to bring it up again. And then it just kind of got lost, except for writers like W.E.B. Du Bois wrote about it. Different people wrote about what it was like for Blacks in the South. But, white historians, especially Southern white historians, educated in the North, were the ones who wrote the history. And that history was from the 1920s up until it started to break down in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s. But for 50 years, until just after the civil rights, the Southern white writers of the early 20th century defined the Civil War. So, I wanted to think about that in a different way. But it's very challenging because it's like, to make a film that's kind of strange and experimental somewhat and kind of arty or whatever, I'm sort of alienating the people who really, the middle-aged white men like me who want to know more about war. I'm alienating all them.
Claro. Bueno, precisamente también queríamos preguntarte por el proceso de investigación, porque de hecho, claro, se nota en la película que hay una gran investigación, una muy, muy, muy profunda, y hay cosas que quizás, claro, te encontraste en el viaje mientras filmabas, pero otras, no sé si es que fue una revisión incluso de muchos documentos, no solamente escritos, audiovisuales quizás, películas, documentales.
Bueno, sí. Además me fui a una convención de War Games, guerra de papel de juegos, o cómo se llama? I don't know how to say paper war games, like these little chits and stuff. This is a huge subculture, gaming subculture. It's huge, but it's, very esoteric at the same time. And so I went to one, which is, and the Civil War gamers are an even smaller minority. There were two rules I had that I wanted to do. I wanted to have no sound effects of battles. I knew that I wanted to have no war sounds at all, because you can't do a war movie with war sound. You have the blood, the bullets, the screaming. What are you going to do? And then I was like, I kind of thought about whether to do reenactors, which is the Civil War reenactors is sort of a thing in the United States. And I was like, I don't know how to do that without it just coming off like a gag. And so I used the games as kind of battle maps, which they actually are beautiful. They're often beautifully designed, and I love the way they look, but they also serve this other purpose in the film, which is kind of like reveals the way that we have been taught to understand the war, that we've been taught to understand it as this Napoleonic strategy war, and not as a long struggle against white supremacism, which is, a really big problem in our country to this day, as you know. And your country and our country are intertwined because of 1973 and different things. So, our problem, because our problem is your problem. We're connected.
Sí, sí. Sí. Bueno, hablando de los juegos de mesa, que es algo que a nosotros nos pareció fascinante también, obviamente, en la película. Y particularmente porque, bueno, yo soy un fanático de los juegos de mesa también, a mí me gusta mucho jugarlos.
Ah, okay.
Sí, y por lo mismo, como que yo entiendo que los juegos de mesa en general tienen dinámicas que de alguna forma son balanceadas. Los juegos de...
Mis niños.
Disculpa. Están jugando. No, te decía de que los juegos de mesa por lo general están balanceados, tienen reglas para que una parte no sea más fuerte que la otra, ¿no? Y yo pensaba en esta idea de que es interesante de que existan muchos juegos que representen batallas de la guerra civil, distintas batallas, y que cada una de estas batallas y cada uno de estos juegos representan quizás puntos de la historia en las que todo podría haber cambiado por una tirada de dados,
Yeah, yeah. Es la cosa de la guerra, ¿no? De que si no hubiera, if Grant wasn't, it wasn't got, if Grant wasn't the general, maybe the whole thing would have gone another way. Or if they had lost this one key battle, who knows? So that's also very interesting to me. I mean, the thing is, I am actually, I think one of the things about sort of the left and maybe experimental avant-garde is that we're supposed to just be only interested in other things. Like we're supposed to take very tiny, obscure things and go, but I'm still interested in every, I'm still interested in these huge geopolitical, historical moments that a lot of other people are. But I want to examine them from a different perspective. Also, I am, I am aware of the fact that I felt a real need to make the film. I felt like this is a film that needs to be made now. I was making it, I started making it a year and a half ago, 18 months ago, and I just felt this, artistic necessity to make this film for myself because I was losing my mind with this kind of political nightmare of the Trump administration. And then as all these kind of like protests of Black Lives Matter and and all of the intense stuff that happened over the last year in the United States happened, I felt very validated to be able to work on it. But then I really couldn't even get it done in time. I was hoping that the film would be, able to be shown maybe in August or July or before the election, but I don't know. I think it doesn't even matter because really the important thing is that this film exists in some level way, and I was able to get it out there. So yeah, and I think there's a playfulness to it that I love because I love games as well. And so I think just to, I don't just judge people for, oh, you made this game about the Civil War, so you're terrible, or this is whatever. I have mixed views about these things. So.
Claro. Representa igual pensábamos de que es toda una cultura de los juegos, hay un montón y se siguen editando, o sea, hay un juego que se editó en los 2000, hay varios años que se llevan haciendo estos juegos y reeditándose, entonces hay personas que de alguna forma juegan también con la distopía, como imaginar de que el país podría haber sido distinto.
Yo pregunté sobre esto, I said, one of the things that happened, and I talked about this in the film, is that one of the reasons that it was so frustrating dealing with the Confederacy is that they did not do what they were supposed to do. They would do weird things. When Grant was at Vicksburg, Lee invaded Gettysburg, and that ended up being much more famous. But that was a response to Grant in Vicksburg. And so they would do these crazy things. And so when Sherman burned Atlanta, and then they moved up and Grant is fighting Lee, the Confederacy decided they wanted to burn Cincinnati. And I asked them, they didn't make it because, and I talk about it in the film, this guy, Thomas stopped him and in Nashville. And I said, have you ever made a game about an alternate history? Like what if, the war to burn Cincinnati? And they said, no one will play it. No one will buy it. They only want to play real games. So the rules of the gamers, this gaming subculture, is similar to like the rules of feature films or something. It reminded me of like, lately I've been watching Clint Eastwood films, films that he directed, and he's like such a good director. He's like, so he does everything just right. And I'm like, this is like, he knows what American audiences want to see, and I'm like, and that's the way gamers are and everything else. So I think like, I'm also thinking about it from this perspective of like taking these forgotten games, like these games from the 1970s, which are very obscure and weird, and are totally gone. And I think of them a little bit the way they are now. These artifacts of these old games are kind of like avant-garde films or something now. They only exist in the weird corners of eBay, and nobody really cares about them. So anyway.
Juan Pablo, no sé si quería hacer una pregunta. Tenía el micrófono.
Hay una sensación en la película como de A diferencia, no sé, por ejemplo, de cómo sacar tu niño Trotsky, de la filosofía Juche o de la trinchera luminosa, que tienen un timbre casi humorístico, como que siento que hay como una energía mucho más de rabia en esta película. O sea, siento que hay como también una toma de posición
¿En
muy
este o en otro?
en esta, en la...
Yeah.
o sea, me imagino, es bastante obvio porque nos acabas de decir de que fue por un tema de sanidad para
Bueno,
soportar vivir bajo Trump.
la cosa del comunismo, la cosa del marxismo-comunismo para mí es interesante porque yo en mi no he I haven't really made a lot of movies about fascism because I'm not interested in fascism. I'm not attracted to fascism. I'm not attracted to male violence. I'm not attracted to male power. But communism is interesting because I'm attracted to it. And yet there's these horrible things that happen. So there's like this artistic thing where you're like, you're attracted and repelled simultaneously, which is just perfect for an artist, in my opinion. And so I thought about how to, what's brought me to this thing about Grant. And I think, and part of it is really trying to understand what this country is. I have a lot of opinions about my own understanding of politics and my own understanding of what got us here, what left us here, and what we need to do, et cetera, et cetera. But really, I really want to think about it from a different perspective. Like, I think one of the things about Grant is that, he was really great at this one particular thing. And then he became president, and maybe he wasn't such a great president. Maybe he had other opinions that weren't that great. But he just happened to be this right person to be able to kind of wreck and really stop this white supremacist takeover. But then, and so to me, one of the things that's interesting is like this idea of how to reconcile my own country, the history of our own country, and with the kind of like larger problem of white supremacism, and then this kind of thinking of white supremacism as like this tumor that we have to cut out or manage, and we never get rid of it. And then sometimes it takes over and sometimes it's pushed back. And so I thought it was to me, this was a really good metaphor, a specific time where, and also I think to the present day, one of the things that, Trump has really done is reveal this kind of fascism. There's always, how do you reveal this? And at what point does it cross over into it? So these are interesting things. And that was one of the things that brought me to it. And there is an anger, yes. And also a kind of, I'm also from the Midwest. And so I think like, coming, where like I'm from sort of a liberal enclave, but then, everyone I know growing up, and a lot of my relatives are fairly conservative. And then if you just go outside the city, it's extremely conservative. And so I think, I think that idea also helped informed me to try and understand, I wanted to understand it more.
Es interesante esa metáfora del cáncer, del tumor. Y hablábamos también con Roberto el tema de esta ambivalencia de la violencia que a veces es necesaria justamente, pero que de todas formas no deja de ser terrible. Y porque claro, Pinochet también cuando hablaba de los marxistas decía, bueno, hay que eliminar el cáncer marxista.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you do about that? I don't know. That's true. Maybe that's a little bit. I was thinking of it more as like a bubonic plague that opened up. not that you can really get rid of, but either way, yeah. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. But to me, I think I really just had this fantasy of just visualizing going through and kind of like all the spots, like almost like sacred ground. The way that we would think about it if the way we think of D-Day beaches as sacred ground, the way the Russians think of Stalingrad as sacred ground in World War II, because fighting this enemy that was so clearly malevolent and so clearly destructive. Whereas in the United States, yes, the enemy was clearly disturbing, destructive, but there was a certain charm. They had beautiful dresses, they had hot women, and some of the enslaved people were relatively well off. They weren't all getting whipped every day. Some of them had nice, cushy jobs, but they also had the Stockholm syndrome and everything else. So I thought, how do you really, what if we thought of this period in our lives the way we think about World War II, as this kind of really very clear moral understanding of what happened. And actually that's the way the men at the time thought. So I thought that's the way how Sherman and Grant really thought of it. They didn't really have moral problems with it. They tried it for about a year. They were very calm. And then they realized that this isn't going to work. There's only one way to do it. We have to push through and wreck as much as we can. So I don't know. Part of it was really just like a fantasy of going back and feeling that I could, relive this, but also see where the stuff is. To me, it was interesting going to some of the spots are really, there's like a Dunkin' Donuts, or there's just like nothing there that really acknowledges what these people were, what they did. Also, just thinking like today, that one of the architects of the war, Alexander Stevens, ended up on this island, a prison, which he complained about a great deal in his letters, but he was only there 6 months, man. So, and even Jefferson Davis, who ran the whole thing, was only in prison for 2 years. So they got off pretty easy, man. So there's a long history also of people getting away with murder in this country.
Sí. Bueno, y a raíz de eso también quería quizás comentar, porque me llamaba mucho la atención de que la película de alguna forma parte con esta canción de Roberto Carlos, El amigo del alma.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little afraid of that, because I'm afraid that his brother who wrote it, or someone's gonna come after me. We did original music for the whole thing, and I really needed a song. And I was like, La canción de Roberto Carlos, I mean, it's kind of just, I was trying to describe it to people who don't know it. And I was like, it's sort of like my way of Frank Sinatra, it's sort of like, it sums up this kind of 70s vibe of like, we're all in this together. We can do it. You can project onto it what you want. You could be like my compadres, you could be like my religion. You can project what you want on it. But it's an icon. It's an iconographic song. And so I was thinking about a version of it. And one of the things that really came together was the musicians were, this was right in the middle of COVID, and the musicians have a baby. And so she really wanted to get a guitarist in it. And she was like, she lived upstairs from this drummer. So the drummer was in her like pod. So she was able to get the drummer. Her husband is a musician, so he was able to work on it. And they needed a guitarist. And I said, this is just do what you can, man. Don't risk your fucking health for my crappy movie. So she ended up running like a 10-meter long cable out to her garden. And the guy came over and played the guitar part of the Roberto Carlos Amigo. And it's just so great, man. I was like, it just blew my mind. I was like, that just guitar part with her kind of like, organ instrumental just really blew my mind. And I knew that I had to start with that. And really, I just think of it as, I've also just come to really think of someone like Grant a little bit as just one of those people on the earth that just does the right thing at the right time. So whatever he did as a general, I don't really understand why he made certain decisions. I'm not a military historian, but he did the right thing for the right people at the right time. And I think there's something really about that that's kind of amazing for humans. And so, I think that was what I was thinking about.
Claro. Sí, porque aparte yo también me quedé pensando en cómo se relacionaba con el coda de su carta, esa que pareciera que está escondida, que es la reflexión final de quizás era algo que podía evitarse, o no sé, como por cómo surge desde
Yeah.
su propio hermano.
Yeah. I don't know. I also wanted to be clear that the film was not an ensayo. It wasn't something that was like, you know, that you would read and go, okay, now I understand. I really wanted this kind of thing that you'd watch this film, you'd get an intellectual understanding, a visual understanding, and then the music, the intellect, and the sound design, which we put a lot of work into, would all have you do this shift of our understanding to help us to help the audience kind of shift our understanding. I mean, there are so many interesting things. Just one of the side notes that comes up in the film is that idea of the Black population of the South being spies and helping the North, and the role of each individual person was not that much. Like, you can try to find, be like, oh, well, this one guy smuggled a lot or whatever, but it's hard to find one person, but when you know that they've realized it in the first 6 months of the war, that the white people who were sympathetic to the North got shot or had to go north. They were killed, had to go north, or they shut up, because it was about murder at that point. After a year, it was no longer political. It was really it was like a blood feud. And so they couldn't trust white people. And I just imagine they're all kind of basically racist men. They're men of their times. And so they're going to be more or less racist. And so they go in and they know that if I talk to white people, I can't trust them. But basically everything a Black person told them was accurate. And so you're like, okay, well, I'm sure the Southern whites figured that out. And it probably made them insane. And so that part I loved too, just that idea, that sort of like fifth column behind the scenes that, I thought that was really great. So.
Claro. Bueno, y esto que mencionas también, si nos puedes comentar, por ejemplo, sobre la banda de sonido, porque toda esta guerra, digamos, como entre hermanos, entre comillas, como gente de una misma nación, ocurriendo con estas rencillas, como pareciera ser como una especie de, no sé, guerra de bandos, de pandillas, pero en otro tono, no sé. ¿Puedes comentar sobre la música, por ejemplo?
Yeah, well, I had watched a lot over the summer of Kinji Fukasaku films, which I don't know if you've seen his films, but they're amazing. And you should watch Batalla de Battles for Honor and Humanity, Battles Against Honor and Humanity. There's a series of his. They're just basically these 70s Yakuza gangster films. And they're just have really great soundtracks, and they're a lot of fun to watch, and they're very, very violent. And so that was like my inspiration. I was like really trying to think about this kind of edge. And I thought of also like the kind of giallo Italian horror and Italian kind of zombie films, where I really wanted this kind of 70s zombie film, almost like the hordes are coming. What do we do? And there's not really, now from 150 years, we could be like, well, they shouldn't have done that. Well, that's not. But, if zombie hordes are coming to take over your country, what do you do? I don't know. This is what they did. So I thought that idea of, I really want to give them just a kick-ass soundtrack. And then, I do a lot of the sound design for my own films myself at the beginning. So I do all the boring stuff. I collect the forest sounds. I collect the wind. I collect the birds. I do a lot of the Foley, and I just do a really rough version of it, because I feel like then I can just hand it off to my sound designers, and I let them do a lot of the fun stuff, so they can just really make it come alive. And so that I like doing all the little work. It's okay, because it's kind of like, I like doing little mindless work because it gives me time to think, and at the same time I would be rewriting where I wanted to go with the film. So I'd be thinking about the film and organizing it and rewriting to try and get it down and cut what I want to focus on, and then I brought it down to those 10 parts, and then we had the music every, 5 to 7 minutes or so, which is kind of like a musical structure. I try to think of my films as sort of experimental musicals in a way.
Sí. Claro. ¿Cómo se llamaba la serie de películas de Yakuza?
Battles Against Honor and Humanity. Kenji Fukasaku and Buntu Sugawara, I think is his name, the main actor in them.
Gracias.
But, he made this film called Battle Royale in 2000, which started, yes, he made Battle Royale, and then which now is Fortnite and everything, and Hunger Games, all these. He's an incredibly influential filmmaker, and people haven't really heard of him. But he made these series of films in the 70s that were really great. And then the 80s films, I don't know, they're okay.
Ya claro, Battle Royale sí la vi. Claro, y después tiene todo este mundo de adolescentes matándose en una isla.
Yes.
Juan Pablo, ¿querías hacer otra pregunta o comentario? De nuevo tienes el micrófono.
Esta idea como de la violencia necesaria, o sea, de que finalmente estos bandos se dan cuenta de que la única salida es llegar hasta las últimas consecuencias. En esta idea un poco como de que si vas a asumir que vas a ejercer violencia, tienes que ejercerla hasta el final, cosa de que tu antagonista no quede con ganas para vengarse.
Es la otra cosa también if you, like in an internal country, if a fascist government takes over and you fight them and you're small, maybe you get killed. Maybe you need to wait. I don't know. But if they take over a third of the country, do you fight them then, or do you wait and let them become their own country? I don't know. This is the decision they made. So it's, I'm kind of a physical coward. I wouldn't have made that decision. Wasn't a decision I would have made, but they made it. And so I really wanted to see what they were going to do. Yeah. And that kind of idea of vengeance in film, which is really fun to watch, like if you're just getting beat up and you just want to go at the other side, or you don't have a choice. So I thought I'm interested in that kind of idea emotionally and then intellectually, taking it from a different angle and making this kind of weird essay film about it. I mean, it was definitely felt weird doing my own voice, because I talk a lot in the movie, and I was worried about that. I was like, that's something I have not done in a film of mine. I write things, have other people say them generally. So that was a little strange, but it was okay. It was fun. I don't know.
Claro, incluso hay un momento en que hablas de qué vamos a hacer con estos zombies, o sea, cómo evitamos de que los zombies vuelvan.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. I do say that. That's right. I say that with because that idea of the zombie obviously was not understood by white people in the 1800s, but by today's standard, they would not stop. They kept coming back again and again. And so I thought, that's one of the things that an insurgency, the other thing is that the South, where to me, I think of it as a coup, but they became really an insurgency. And so then you're coming on their land, and you have to get them out. And so it really becomes very complicated, where, the lessons that the United States learned from the Civil War, they were like, we can fucking do anything now. And it wasn't necessarily the best lessons, the lessons they should have learned was we should love each other and take part in democracy in the world. But those are some of the lessons. The other lessons were, we can fucking destroy anything. We beat them, we can beat anyone. So, people used the legend of Sherman and Grant to justify all kinds of things in the United States history. So.
Y en ese sentido, que has podido mostrar la película, me imagino, en Estados Unidos, y si ha habido algún tipo de reacción del público hacia
Es interesante, no sé mucho, but it's just shown in the St. Louis Film Festival, which is my hometown. They've supported me a lot, and I like this festival a lot. And they took it on a rough cut, and they accepted it on a rough cut, and so did Doc Leipzig, which was pretty cool. And a lot of places didn't want it on a rough cut, which I don't blame them. But I think the film overall has been pretty positive. The response from the press and from people who've seen it. But to be honest, it's the time of politics in the United States right now is not subtle. It's not 19th century. It's not subtle. It's very like, what the fuck, So I think that my hope from the film is that it'll go out there and have legs and live okay, breathe. But I'm under no delusions that it's going to be the film for the moment right now in the United States. And, it's a time for crisis, and it's a time to, that a lot of other people need their voices, magnified and amplified.
Claro, conversábamos con Roberto de que la película de todas formas tiene como... es muy bella y poderosa en el sentido de que es una gran película sobre cómo muchas veces hay que ejercer violencia para hacer cosas, para luchar por el futuro. O sea, y sentimos que es muy buena también la jugada de no hacer referencias directas al presente. O sea, de que efectivamente una película que nos va a poder hablar sobre el fascismo en 20 años más, en 10 años más, en 5 años más. Es muy atemporal en ese sentido.
En ese sentido, sí, en otra manera tú es importante enfrentarse, confront el fascismo, like whether, you do it within, to me, I have fantasies of violence. I'm interested in violence in film and things like that. But in real life, I don't believe that violence is going to solve a lot of things in most cases. And so, I think but at the same time, if you just, I think that the most important thing was that if you just let this thing go and they're fighting, what are you going to do? And so, at some point, you're right, there is that necessary violence in war. I don't know. It's interesting. It's also like, what do we want to focus on in our country? And one of the things that we, especially, white people in the country can take pride in is that we worked to, help end slavery 10 to 15 or 20 or 30 years sooner than it would have ended, and so that's something that's important. But it's also important to look at what we did afterwards and how badly the country got fucked up afterwards and what we didn't do. And so I think by not understanding the history, we can kind of like keep making these same mistakes in a way. So I don't know. Also, I think a figure like Grant, who's a complicated figure, he uses state violence in a very intense way. And then at the same time, he's a humanitarian. He was ahead of his time in some ways. He was a man of his time in other ways, where he was like anti-Semitic. He had that anti-Semitic little moment that he did in the thing that we talked about in the film, which he made up for later. But, these are things that he did. He also owned a slave early in his life, which, I would say he made up for that. But, there's this idea of redemption as well, but also using him as a way to as us to go along and look at this history, but really look at all the weird little corners and strange parts of the history.
Y llegando a eso, como que hay una reflexión también muy poderosa en este momento en nuestro país, que habrás visto pasando antes del COVID por todo un proceso de movilización social bien importante contra el gobierno y contra la herencia legal de Pinochet. Y es un poco qué rol pueden jugar el arte y el cine en particular en procesos de transformación, o si es que podemos exigirle al arte un rol en esos procesos de transformación, porque también es peligroso eso. O sea, no sé, podemos fácilmente llegar y terminar como en un arte que se juega más por una moralidad que por sus propias cualidades intrínsecas. Entonces quería saber un poco eso, ¿qué opinabas? Así.
En los Estados Unidos, una cosa es el problema es el dinero. Hay mucho dinero y hay bastante posibilidad de ganar la vida con películas si tomas una línea en una manera, una línea política y una manera de hacer el cine. I'm not like I'm not in love with like underground cinema per se because of underground cinema, or I'm not in love with avant-garde cinema because of avant-garde cinema. I love all kinds of cinema. I love all kinds of movies and different kinds of art. But for my own work, I'm not good at imagining what I want to do, convincing people, getting budget, convincing a lot of other people to do this huge thing, and taking 5 or 6 years or 3 years or whatever it's going to take and get a production team company behind me. I'm not good at that for various reasons. And so I really like to work on a pretty slow level with a few people. And that means I have to keep it very cheap. And so, but I also have a job. I'm able to teach so I can make some of my own money, and I have a little bit of a name and some press, so I can sometimes get small grants here and there to help me. But I do think that it is important to be able to make a kind of a small cinema, like it's not to be purposefully obscure. You know, I want a big audience. I want a big audience to love my films the way anybody does. But I already often, when I make a film, I often think of it the way, you know, I just said, like this idea of an obscure Fukasaku film. Like, it's not obscure to people in Japan. It wasn't obscure in the 70s. But if you don't know a lot about Yakuza films, which I didn't in last year, I just found out about it through research. So I think like you can kind of create your own hidden history. Like, this is a whole movement of film you can make yourself in a way. And the audience can find you, and people and programmers and festivals can find you. And I think it's important that we be able to do that with any kind of art form, whether it's film or writing or painting or anything. And so, because you have to be able to take risks and try to have your own vision. And even if you fail, I mean, I've made films that have not connected with an audience really at all, you know, and I made this one on Wuthering Heights that was very challenging. That was weird, but I love that novel. I wanted to try it. So, you know, sometimes you just have to do things. And I think even a beautiful failure can help you in a way, because you're like, okay, well, maybe I don't know, we'll try something else. We'll see. But also the funny thing is that my film, Trinchera Luminosa del Presidente Gonzalo, was a very difficult film. It took a long time for that film to get a premiere. People turned me down again and again. And that is one of my films that has legs, so to speak. You know, it shows up in weird parts of the internet here and there. And it's had a different life of its own. So that's my dream, that I make little films that can have a life in 5 or 10 years or beyond afterwards, you know.
Sí,
I have low expectations, very low expectations.
Quiero agregar una cosita pequeña, solamente en este comentario, que, bueno, para las personas que estén viendo esto y lleguen a este punto, muchas de las películas de Jim están subidas a su página de Vimeo, o sea, pueden ver las películas de...
Yeah.
Está La Trinchera Luminosa, están varios de sus cortometrajes y largometrajes, entonces pueden acceder a ellas también a través de Vimeo y
Sí.
están liberadas.
Sí.
Sobre la Trinchera Luminosa hay una historia divertida que se la mostré a un amigo hace un par de años y me comentaba que ya la había visto en una especie como de curso de adoctrinamiento.
¿De cuál?
Sí.
¿Curso de qué?
Como de adoctrinamiento político. La estaban viendo como manual.
Yes. Muy bien. Well, you know, it was used as propaganda. That film became propaganda by derechistas there was that woman, I don't remember her name. She ran for president of Peru. She was a young communist woman, and they claimed that she was in my film and she had been part of the Shining Path. And so they used a clip of my film to say that was her, and that it was really made it didn't make any sense because my film takes place in 1989. She was probably born in 1985 or something. But you know, propaganda doesn't have to make sense. The logic doesn't have to go far, you know. So.
Basta con decirlo para que se transforme en realidad ahora.
Yeah.
Oye, bueno, no sé si es que quieren agregar algo más. Yo creo que ha sido una...
Bueno, gracias. Disculpa que no intenté hablar sobre el tema en español, pero
no hay problema.
Escapó. So you guys are going to have to do a lot of subtitling. Sorry.
Sí.
No problem.
No hay problema. Muchas gracias por la conversación.
Gracias.